Make host. There you go. You are host officially. You're officially now a host.
Okay, so what I will do now is I will share the screen. And it comes up on the last slide. Okay, so, right, so literature reviews. And my focus this morning is the purpose and how to write one. So I'm Peter Atkinson. Why am I doing this? Well, and what's it about? I think that the literature review is often gives people big headaches. They start off by thinking that this is straightforward, and then find as they go on that it's more and more work, more and more of a headache, and actually more and more difficult. I think it's quite common for people to think, you know, after they've been working on their PhD for only a few weeks, oh, I'll write at least some of my literature review, and actually, of course, you can't, because a literature review is a major undertaking, and actually, it's possibly with most PhDs, at least in the business field, it actually tends to be the biggest part of the PhD, the biggest task in it. So it becomes a difficult aspect of the writing of the thesis, and that's why we need to discuss it. And actually, when I think back over my time doing my PhD, I really don't think there was enough discussion about what was required from a PhD literature review at all. And I had a supervisor who had a very definite idea of how he wanted it to be done. And I really suffered from that because his method didn't fit what I wanted to do at all. And that gave rise to me thinking in great depth about the literature review, which is why I'm here now, really. So let's think about the purposes. Now, I believe that most people who are watching this will be PhD students. Others of you will be more interested in writing journal articles now. But even if you are a PhD student, presumably you will want to either produce journal articles from your PhD or write journal articles after you've finished it. So I think we need to just think a little bit about what the differences are. With a PhD, you're trying to do something that's quite comprehensive in your topic. With a journal article, you're not. You're trying to do something that's much more short. You've got a limited amount of space, so you have to be concise. With a PhD, probably you've got plenty of space in which to discuss your literature. But let's just relate this to the purpose of the PhD altogether. I think it's important to remember, you know, that when you're doing a PhD, that it isn't just about the thesis. Really, I think the thesis is a byproduct of the PhD. Actually, the product is you, your subjectivity, your expertise, your own judgment when you are reading things and contemplating doing other research as well afterwards. Because what the PhD is designed to do in the end is to produce a professional researcher. I mean, having said this, I suppose that there are slight differences around the world. For example, in the US, a PhD is mostly designed to produce a good teacher, that is, somebody who knows about a certain area, a certain subject area. The British approach is to produce a researcher, so that's what I'm thinking of now. Although, of course, they both do both. Both systems do both. So what you're doing, actually, is you're building up your own expertise, your own judgments, your own knowledge, and so on. And you're doing this by producing an apprentice piece. This is what they used to call it when somebody like a carpenter, a furniture maker, say, used to be an apprentice, and before they were actually licensed to be trading on their own account, they had to produce an apprentice piece to demonstrate that they had the skills necessary to do the job. So, what you're doing in the literature review then is you're building a case for the research question or questions. Okay, that's the important thing. That's what the purpose of it is. You're trying to build a case for the research questions. So you're not trying to inform anybody like you would in an essay. And I think this can be a little bit of a problem for people who've come from a background into the PhD where they've had to write essays a lot for examinations or for coursework. You're not trying to be informative. Now that seems a bit strange, doesn't it? But you're not. What you're trying to do is to build a case. Sorry, I've just messed up my PowerPoint because I've got to admit somebody into the... Okay. So, I said that when I was doing my PhD, my supervisor had a very definite idea of how things should be done. What he wanted me to do was what he called a systematic literature review. And a systematic literature review is a certain kind of literature review. I've spoken about this before. It's not appropriate for all situations, though. The idea of this comes from the natural sciences. And in fact, I think it was developed in the context of medical research primarily. And the concern there was to have literature reviews which were transparent and reproducible. I mean, if you are doing research in the medical field, of course, you need to demonstrate that you are using your funding wisely and that you're not wasting time, you're not, exercising your own obsessions or your own interests particularly, but you're actually getting to grips with the problem. The thing is about doing this kind of literature review is that, well, primarily, I don't think it is a literature review. You see, the systematicity of it all is to do with the literature searches. And this works very well where everybody agrees what the objects of study are, what the terminology is, and so on. So you can actually just go to your database of articles, Scopus or whatever, Web of Science, whatever it is, type in your keywords and expect to get back everything that's in your field. So it doesn't work so well when you're dealing with concepts rather than constructs, because concepts are a bit more slippery, aren't they? You can use different words for the same things, same words for different things, and the field isn't so much defined by the key words. I'd also say that the systematic literature reviews are very good for what Thomas Kuhn calls normal science. You've probably come across this idea of his paradigms in science. In Kuhn's model of the way that knowledge develops, you have a paradigm in which everybody agrees how to go about things, what the approach is, what the aims are, and so on. And this means that you're always looking for gaps in knowledge, and you fill these gaps by going through the usual processes. It all becomes rather routine. Eventually, of course, the paradigm breaks because you start getting anomalies. In the natural sciences, you can really only have one paradigm at a time. In the social sciences, you can have several paradigms at the same time. Because they don't necessarily completely contradict each other. They don't annihilate each other. Although having said that, I think it's even true in the natural sciences that you can have more than one paradigm at the same time. I mean, for example, you can say that the modern physics, Einsteinian physics, actually breaks the paradigm of classical physics, Newtonian physics. But, you know, if you're going to design a new petrol engine, you don't need to take into account the relativity and the different aspects that have come out of modern physics. You can approximate things very easily using classical physics. So I wouldn't say that the classical physics paradigm is completely broken. It's very useful, in fact. So if you're going to do a systematic literature review, you need to decide what your system is and record it. What you're probably going to do is to try searches using different combinations of keywords in different databases, in which case you should be recording this so that you don't repeat yourself. And after all, you know, when you put in your keywords into your databases, you tend to get back thousands of hits, don't you? Rather than just a few. So you're probably only going to look at the first 2 or 3 pages. I know I'm guilty of doing that. But you do need to keep this this record of what your system is and how you've gone through it. There's a very good article on this system by Tranfield et al. And that is listed in the references at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. However, if you're going to try and do something that's more ambitious, then perhaps you need another approach. Now, this other approach, there isn't really one word for it. It used to be fairly easygoing, you know, up to about maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The universities tended to be very easygoing about how literature reviews were done. And it did give you a certain amount of latitude in how you went about it, so you could bring in your own personal slants much more. Now, I think perhaps under the pressure of systematic reviews and that method, there's much more consciousness of appropriateness of the literature review. So there are different types of literature review which can be done. I'm using the term narrative here. I've also used the term interpretive later on. But this is putting the emphasis on how you tell the story about what your research question is going to be, and how you interpret the literature. Because, you know, two researchers could look at the same body of literature, could read the same articles and write completely different literature reviews because they have different subjectivities. And I did say that in the main purpose of the PhD process is to form you as a subject so that your subjectivity is one of an expert. Sometimes the word subjective is used to mean anything goes. That isn't the case. One subject is not as good as another. One subjectivity is not as good as another. One subjectivity is more trained, more expert than another. So I quite like the term interpretive literature review as well. After all, you know, even if you're doing a systematic literature review, you've still got to interpret what you read. So although in the natural sciences there's a tendency to think otherwise, to think that you can be completely objective, I really don't believe that you can. Okay, so you can categorize these literature reviews in different ways. I've just taken one categorization system here: general, theoretical, methodological, and historical. A general one is probably what you're going to be doing for your PhD. You're looking at the most significant current aspects of knowledge in your topic area. But, of course, it's also circumscribed by your research objective, hypothesis, or problem. There is a little bit of a tendency I find with PhD students to get over enthusiastic, to try and read everything and include everything in the literature review. Don't try to do that, you go crazy. You do have to focus it to some extent. Theoretical examines how theory shapes or frames research. I think inevitably you're going to be doing a bit of that because you do have to have some sort of theory behind what you're doing in order to give depth of analysis. Methodological, well, you are going to look at different methodologies because in your methodology chapter, you are going to have to justify the methodology you've chosen. So perhaps you might find yourself doing a kind of mini literature review there, but of a very different kind to the one that you've done in the main literature review. And historical describes the development of topic or theory. I often find that the historical and theoretical go together, in fact, because if you're trying to develop theory, then you need to know where the theories come from before you can develop it. Now, yeah, I was talking about normal science just now and about Kuhn's idea of paradigms and paradigm disruption. So I recommend that everybody looks at Sandberg and Alverson's 2011 article on this, about how it's very important to not only to do normal science, I mean, normal science is a good thing to do and everybody needs to do some, but also to understand the disruption is also important as well, because we do need new ideas. And new ideas come from new novel combinations of things that haven't been put together before. So I recommend that you have a look at that article. It's very interesting. In previous talks, I have mentioned this idea of hermeneutic circles. And this, I think, is very important, both for the development of your literature review and for the development of you as a researching subject. You see that you have these two cycles here. The first one, the small one, the search and acquisition one, is where you read, identify, refine, search, sort, select, and you keep on going around that circle. Now, you will find, I think, I certainly did, that at the beginning of your PhD, you read some articles, you find some important articles. And then another 6 months later, you come back to one of them, read it again, and discover that it's completely different to what you remember it. That it's actually, because you've now developed as a subject, as a researching subject, you're now reading the article differently because of your additional knowledge and context. And that is, I think, an important part of the process. You can't assume that the PhD process is linear. It doesn't go from A to B to C to D. It goes from A to B to C and then back to A and then to D and then to E and then back to B and so on. You have to allow for that and don't think that you are in some way failing because you're having to read things again. And in fact, if you find a particularly groundbreaking article, you'll find that you probably read it over and over and over again. And each time you read it, you see it differently. Now, also, as this is going on, of course, you're developing your ideas. And this is where the larger cycle comes in, the analysis and interpretation cycle. So you start to find that your idea for your PhD perhaps develops. And this, of course, can get you into dangerous ground because as your ideas develop, then the whole thing changes and things that you've written start to become not lined up with the things that you are writing. And this is something you do have to be careful about, particularly if you are doing something that really is groundbreaking. So you have this, sorry, I'm going to admit somebody else. You have this sort of critical assessment, the development of your argument, the development of the research problem and questions even. And then this takes you back into the other circle. So remember this is quite an involved and complex process. Don't be afraid of it. Now, I was talking about appropriateness of different kinds of literature review, and I do think that this model by Schultz is very useful here. What Schultz suggests is that there's a kind of continuum between the systematic literature review and the interpretive literature review. And all of them are going to, all literature reviews are going to some extent be both of them. It's going to be a mixture. But the extent to which it's systematic depends on how much really, I suppose, it's going to be normal science, and how much is interpretive is going to depend on how much is going to be disruptive or problematizing. So, if you look at the systematic end of the spectrum here on the left-hand side, research on a given topic can be bounded. So the good literature review is able to extract all the relevant body of research. Now, as you go towards the right, you see there are different stages. So you have to evaluate the theory, survey the state of knowledge, develop a theory or framework. Now, it's probably your PhD will be somewhere in one of these middle areas. I have to admit that I was probably a bit overambitious with mine and went completely to the problematizing end, which so you can see why the literature review method that was suggested by my supervisor didn't really work for me. So here at the problematizing end of the spectrum, research is entangled in the dynamic, sorry, don't know what happened there, in a dynamic network of ideas and concept. It hasn't got any really definite boundaries. And that makes it, that does actually make things very difficult because you don't know when to stop, I found, the literature review. But you do have to stop somewhere, of course, and it's important to understand that. So, I'll just emphasize where the literature review fits into the general pattern of things. All research must start off from a research problem. There is no point in starting from a gap, for example. And I must emphasize this. A lot of people think that research starts from gaps. It doesn't. Because just because there's a gap doesn't necessarily mean it's worth filling it. And an example I like to give is nobody knows about the fish buying habits of lecturers, but then nobody needs to know that, nobody wants to know, it's not interesting to anybody, so that gap doesn't need filling. So you need to start from a problem, a real world problem, something that people need a solution to, and need a solution to it now. Now, then you build the case for the research questions or question in the literature review. There is an old-fashioned kind of idea, I think it's fair to say it's old-fashioned, that hypotheses can go before the literature review. I suppose you might be able to do that if you were doing something that was very definitely on the left-hand end of the spectrum there, of the normal science spectrum. But I can't really see how that works because you need to build a case for your research questions. You need to say why you want to do this. Now, let's think about the literature itself. The literature itself is, of course, a network of concepts. That is, there are major ideas that come up. Here, they're represented by A, B, C, D. They are the major works, the major concepts in that topic area. But, of course, the whole thing is like a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue. And one of the purposes of the literature review here is to situate what you're doing, your work, in this dialogue. So this is a big discussion that's been ongoing for some time, probably, between a number, possibly hundreds, possibly thousands even, of different scholars in different parts of the world. This is what the literature consists of. So what you need to do, first of all, is to identify what are the most significant works in your area. Now, if you don't know anything about the subject area at all, you don't even know what keywords to look for. You probably won't be in that situation with a PhD, but you might find it from time to time. In those kind of situations, I go to Google and Wikipedia and all these terrible things that we tell our students not to use, because you just need to find out what the keywords are. Well, how do people talk about this sort of thing? Of course, you don't cite these sources, but you do use them for further investigation. Then you can do your systematic review kind of idea, where you take groups of keywords and you search for them. And then you read what comes up. But after a short time, you start to know the area. You start to know your way around this network. And as you do this, you will find that you identify, the big buildings, the wide piazzas and so on in the subject area. And these are the ones that you need to pay attention to. And of course, there will be minor works as well that are also useful because of your particular slant on things. But finding these major works are important. Once you've found them, then of course what you do is twofold. First of all, you look backwards by looking at who they have cited. And then you look forwards by putting the article or book or whatever it is into Google Scholar and look for who has cited it. This way you start to find your way around the network and you build up the body of literature that you're going to be reviewing in your literature review. But it's all about actually finding your way around the network. It's like going to a strange town and finding your way around the streets, finding which buildings are useful to you, like a bank or a supermarket or whatever. And actually finding also the side streets that are useful. I'm going to give you an example here of something I've just been working on with Ali Reza, in fact, which is a development of a theory of leadership. So first of all, you have this original theory. I'm not going to go into the details of this. That's not important. But the original theory came out in the 1960s, and it was about politics. It was in the political field. That was then taken into the business and organization field and developed there. And this was a leadership style theory, and it put the emphasis on two leadership styles. However, they then developed a third one. So this is a kind of historical development of the theory. However, what we're doing is we're suggesting that if you put this into the context of organization theory, so you don't just see leadership as something on its own, but as something that is to do with organizations, is an aspect of organizations, then this starts to change the perspective on the relationship between these three styles and actually makes the third style, this last development, much more significant than it appeared at first. But then if you put it into another context again, you take all of that, put it into another context of national culture, then the whole thing changes again because the relationship between these leadership styles is different in different parts of the world. So that is a kind of literature review. And each one of these areas here, of course, has its own body of literature. But what you're doing, you see, is also you're developing a kind of conceptual framework. And in some works, particularly if you're doing quantitative work, you will need to have a conceptual framework. And that should be also coming out of your literature review. So you can see here, actually, by the way, that there are three bodies of literature that we're looking at. We're looking at the literature on this particular theory, then we're looking at the literature on the organization stuff, and the theory on the national culture stuff. So there's three bodies of literature there, and that is actually quite common in PhDs as well. And that's a point I'll come back to later on. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to use something like Mendeley or RefWorks or something like that to store the information, so that when you're writing your thesis, particularly in the literature review, you can just put these citations in automatically, and more importantly, automatically generate the references at the end. I was just talking to somebody who's doing an engineering PhD, who hadn't done this, who'd done everything manually. And then his supervisor said that he didn't like the way he'd done the references and would he do them again? Well, you know, that's about a day's work for him. If it had been more, in it, there would have been several days' work. If you have it in something like, if you've got all your details of all your literature in something like Mendeley, just one click will sort everything out. And it's just a very easy, makes it a very easy task to produce the references section. So do remember to do that. Okay, so coming back to my point about the conceptual framework, here's a kind of mind map that I've done of something that I've been working on. It's good to do these things. You need to do these things because they change. And I think that it's fair to say that you need to do this on a regular basis. Don't just assume that because you've got a conceptual framework, a mind map of what you're doing, that that's it forever. You need to keep going back to it and changing it and updating it as your perceptions of the field change, as you become more knowledgeable. Some people there are two different ways of writing, really. One is to build it up and the other one is to kind of overflow. I go for that latter type. I mean, I tend to read a lot and then I get to a point where I feel I've got to write something now. And I go off and I write about it. Other people like to build things up. And if you want to go about things like that, then it's a good idea to actually make a list like this. So you take your topic areas and you put in the literature that you want to mention in those topic areas. And then you can write it from there. I think that's probably a better way of doing it, actually, but it's a matter of temperament, really, I think. I like to do things in a more subjective sort of way, I suppose. Literature review is often presented as a funnel. So you start from the research problem, which is an open question, and you go through this process, which actually produces your research questions at the end. So it focuses it in. And as I was saying earlier, the originality of your thesis will probably come from you bringing together concepts in a novel combination, and typically three concepts. So these are represented by this Venn diagram here. And where the three overlap, that's where your research is. That's where your originality comes from. So you would have three bodies of literature. One in, you'd have therefore three main sections in your literature review. One on concept one, one on concept two, one on concept three. And within those, of course, you would then have any existing cross studies of concept 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 and so on. And those would actually, that then starts to define what your research gap is. Sorry, I seem to have...
Peter, I just realized I reclaimed the host, but it seems to be you can share you can carry on with your presentation. So I just reclaimed the host to see if anybody going to join, so I can actually admit them.
Oh, right. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm now moving on to how to write the thing. Yeah. The main thing about actually writing the literature review or any of the thesis, is to maintain something we call the golden thread. The golden thread you might think of as being a kind of statement or topic of the whole thesis. So if you were to summarize your thesis in one sentence, which you should be able to do, by the way, then you need to make everything within that thesis consistent with that one idea or sentence. So this means that everything you put into the thesis has to be consistent. How do you make sure that you're doing this? Well, if you take a paragraph, it should have a topic sentence. And I think this is very important, actually. I'm going to come on to some other examples about this. In this case, I've just given you a paragraph here of something I've written recently. And the topic sentence here is, more recently, many researchers have chosen to focus on specific aspects of leadership. So, for example, servant leadership, where the leader pays attention to the individual needs of subordinates and how to empower them. And authentic leadership, where the leader is completely open with subordinates and has their exemplary personal qualities on permanent display. That immediately tells the reader what this paragraph is about. They don't have to wade through it and wonder what it was about at the end. And that sentence will actually relate to the overall theme of the article or chapter that you're writing. And it will always make it easy for the reader to understand what it is that you're saying. So sticking to this golden thread is very important. And it is easy to wander off it, particularly if you haven't taken account of the fact that your ideas may be developing. So, you know, you get to the end and you find that the conclusion actually doesn't support at all, or doesn't line up at all with what you set out to do in the first place. Of course, it must do. So you really do need to have to keep these two in mind all the way through. So how do you keep to the thread? Well, you need to ask yourself questions like this. What is this section of the literature review supposed to show? How does it add to the development of the argument? And does this section have an introduction and a conclusion? These are important questions. So common mistakes that people make is, well, first of all, you know, it's very frustrating, isn't it? Because if you read 100 articles and you find that you can only use 25 of them in your literature review, then you feel you've wasted your time. Well, you haven't. In fact, you are inevitably going to read a lot more than you're going to use in your literature review. And there's no point in trying to include references, citations of articles that aren't really adding anything to your argument. That is weakening your literature review, not strengthening it. So don't have a parade of stuff that you have read. You need to be selective. And it's just a fact that you are going to read a lot more than you're going to use, but that's part of the process. You can also have something that I call a parade of scholars, which is very similar to a parade of stuff, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Wandering off the thread, very easy to do. Badly structured writing is really, well, it's not good for you, it's not good for your career, and it will annoy your examiners. The secret to writing well-structured prose is to make sure that you have a clear topic sentence for each paragraph. So you should be able to take a section of your thesis and just read the topic sentences and get 90% of the meaning. And you'll find that with a good textbook. If you pick up a good textbook, you'll find that you can do that. You can just read probably the first sentence of each paragraph and you'll get 90% of the meaning. Something else that people do is figures, diagrams, tables and graphs and so on must be referred to in the text. Don't just put in a diagram and not mention it. It's not doing anything then. It's not actually doing its job. Also, something else that some people do is to, probably unconsciously, but they cite work that doesn't clearly support the assertion that they're supposed to support. And I've come across that even in experienced scholars. You know, you've come across a statement with a citation and you think, oh, that's interesting, I'll go and look that up. When you look it up, of course, you find sometimes that the citation doesn't actually support that assertion. So be careful about that. Your examiners will pull you up on it. I certainly would if I came across it in their PhD thesis. Okay, here's an example of a parade of stuff. This is taken from an early draft of somebody's PhD thesis. I apologize to him now, but I know he writes much better now, so it's just part of the learning process. So we've got here, according to scholars such as Taylor, Fayol, and Mayo, effectiveness is the extent to which an organization achieves goals such as maximizing production, minimizing costs, etc. Now, if you read this through, what is it doing? What is this paragraph telling us? Can you actually?
I can shoot you dead later on. You know that.
I know. So, what does it tell us? What does this paragraph tell us? It actually looks, at first sight, as though it's just a way to show that this person has read all of these things. What point's it making?
By the way, God, this is my PhD section of my PhD. So
I didn't like to say, Oliver.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, remember that when I was writing this one, I didn't know it. Nobody told me how to write it, and that is a common mistake. There's no shame on that one. There's no shame whatsoever.
Absolutely, yeah, no shame at all. No, because you're only going to learn from your mistakes, aren't you? I should add that I didn't make these mistakes because I actually studied English before I came into business. So I'd actually taught people to write before I attempted my own PhD. So anyway, it's always good to share a little knowledge. So this paragraph doesn't really have a unity. Well, it does have a unity, but you have to read it through. You have to read it through maybe a couple of times and think about it before you work out what that unity is. It's so much easier if you have a topic sentence at the beginning. And what happens, you see, if you have paragraph after paragraph like this, is that it just seems like a vague mist, and the examiner will lose patience with your writing.
Can I just add something? You see, the problem with this paragraph is, guys, I mentioned 3 people. I thought that time, I mean, there are the very big names in terms of the theory. But what I didn't realize at the time, what is the point of these people to my research? And I didn't clarify this one. So when I'm talking about the Taylor, when I'm talking about the Mayo, so I know there are very famous people there, but do they have anything to do with my research? And I didn't clarify this one here. Sorry, Peter, just wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, you could easily rewrite this. I say easily, but with a bit of thought and skill, you could rewrite this and make it all relevant. And I'm sure that Ali Reza had the right sort of idea in mind in the first place, but didn't actually manage to get it onto the paper. But this kind of parade of stuff approach can actually be quite fatal. Because if I've read 10 articles today, I'm determined to make them all count in my literature review, so I'm going to shoehorn them in somehow. Doesn't work. You have to work out what you want to say before you say it, and then you can actually say it clearly. The other thing here is this parade of scholars. Now, I made this up. This is just a joke kind of approach, but I wanted to make the point here. So, we've got Ferrudi 2017 found that dogs bite people. On the other hand, Nazarian 2020, in a study of higher education in higher education sector in London, discovered that under extreme circumstances, people do bite dogs. However, Atkinson 2021 identified national culture as a factor in man on dog biting, with, for example, Norwegians being over twice as likely to bite their dogs as Irish people. Now, I completely made that up, and those nationalities are selected at random, by the way. But what this does, what this approach does, is to put all the emphasis onto the scholars. Yes. So we've got here Fruity, Nazarian, and Atkinson, but they're not really of interest, are they? It's the ideas behind it that's of interest. So I suggest an alternative format for this paragraph. First of all, we have a topic sentence. Dogs and people sometimes have an uneasy relationship. So now we know what the paragraph's about. Dogs often bite people, Fruity 2017. On the other hand, under extreme circumstances, people do bite dogs, Nazarian 2020. However, national culture is a factor in man on dog biting, with, for example, Norwegians being over twice as likely to bite their dogs as Irish people, Atkinson 2021. So here, the scholars actually take a secondary place to the actual information that they've produced, which is as it should be. So if you find yourself slipping into this habit of saying things like, you know, Atkinson holds that, or Atkinson says that, you're probably actually getting into a parade of stuff sort of situation. So, you know, it's just a tip there to avoid that. So, in conclusion, be a helicopter. That is, be able to see both the detail and the larger picture. You've got to be able to zoom in and zoom out, up and down. Because not only do you have to get the detail right, but you have to get it so that it's consistent with the overall picture of the thesis. Be iterative. Keep going back over the same ground. There's no shame in that. Go back and read your main articles again, and you'll see them differently next time. Revisit your overall plan at least once a week. Yes, you must do that because your ideas are inevitably going to evolve. They're going to change over time. So you need to make sure you're keeping things in focus by going back to your plan. And of course, you need to know when to stop. You know, it's very easy once you're involved in things not to know when to stop. And I think you need to have some advice from your supervisor about that. I think I probably went too far with my literature review because when I went to my Viva, they told me to take some of it out. They said there was too much in it. But that's an easy problem to have as well. So there you are. I've also put at the end here a bibliography of things that I've referred to, all of which are useful, I think. So I'm going to now hand the hosting back to Alireza, I think. And
yeah, I think Peter, myself, Hani, we're gonna have a little bit of chat. I'm gonna start with some of the things I want to recap with you guys, and I think they are very important.
Do you want me to keep the PowerPoint on
yes,
the
please.
screen?
Yes, please,
Okay.
because I want to refer to that one. Remember, guys, what is very important, and I think we all agree on that one. We're saying, when you're writing the PhD or when you're writing an article, there are a common mistake that people start looking for a gap in the books or in the articles, and they're trying again another common mistake. They think this one: if I get some variable from this article and get another variable from another and put them together, that is a contribution. That is something I'm going to do new, or because something done in another country, I'm going to bring it back to this country, that could be contribution. None of these are a contribution. The more importantly is, I think, so I keep telling my student, you need to look for the real problem and issue in the reality, not in the books, not in the articles, right? You may find you have an issue which is real. For instance, I'll give you this bad example to my students in this one. Imagine in front of my house, there is a hole. That hole is a big problem. So the question is how I'm going to do it, how I'm going to make sure I'm going to fill in this hole. That is a problem. That's the issue I have, and that's a research question I want to answer. How I'm going to do that? Then I'm going to go in the literature and in the article to find out the method what I know, the method I know, or the other people, they had the same issue, how they managed to sort this problem. So you cannot look for the problem in the article. You can look for the gaps in that problems for the. So that's the one thing you need to consider very carefully. It doesn't really matter if you do PhD or you're doing the article. The other thing is, when you design your research question is the main thing in any research, in your PhD, in your article. That is the main thing you have in your hand. And whatever you do, you want to find the answer for that. So your literature review is, I always say, the theoretical justification of your research question, to know what we know. In fact, you're trying to tell and explaining what we know. You're trying to say what we don't know, which is that your research question you're trying to find the answer. So it's a theoretical justification of your research question. And I think Peter, can you go to that slide? It was funnel on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. When we are talking about, okay, if that is the case, and you're trying to justify the research question, basically, when you theoretically, so you're going to start with some keywords, and you're going to put this one on the Web of Science, Google Scholar, whatever. And with your knowledge at the time, you may end up with the thousands of, or sometimes million of articles. You can't read all of them. Then you need to make sure you are narrowing down. And that is the funnel thing is coming. But there is another thing. You reach to the point that when you have maybe 10, 12 main article you think you must read, and those are the base of your study. But those cannot be the only article you need to refer. So then it's going to be upside down funnel. So from narrow, then you need to go to broaden up on that area, on that niche part you're trying to do. So for instance, you got 10 articles and then it's, oh, they refer to that person, they refer to that person, that refer to that person. Oh, these articles be cited by another article. So you see, now you're going to go to broaden, but this is a concentrated broadening your literature review. Okay, so it's two ways. One, from the first part, you're going to come from very broad to narrow. When you realize what you really want to do and what is the thing you want to do, then you still need to broaden your knowledge to see how other people done, what other people done on that area, to make sure you have a good knowledge of the writing, a proper literature review on that one as well. So I think that is extremely important, which should be, remember that one, which must be aligned with what is your research question and how your research question been designed. Because whatever you do, eventually, you need to respond to the research question you proposed at the very beginning. Your methodology the same, your literature review the same, your discussion. So if your methodology is not aligned, it's not going to help you to answer the question, it doesn't work. If your literature review is not going to help the reader to understand what we know, therefore what we don't know is your research question, then that doesn't work. And I think what Peter said, and I made a mistake, remember that one, English is my second language as well. So when I started doing my PhD, it probably is, I think this is a common mistake you can see from even English people. The concentration of the paragraph is very important, as well as the story you're going to tell. Each paragraph they're talking to each other, although each paragraph that on their own should have a meaning, but remember, these paragraphs is not a standalone. It should be related to previous and the latter paragraph as well. Peter, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. I mean, it is important to not only, as you were just saying, not only just to write clear paragraphs, but to have them follow each other in a logical sequence as well. So it builds a narrative, and that's why it's called a narrative literature review. And you're kind of telling a story that will justify your research question.
This is exactly, I'll give the example of this one. You know, when you have a book, any book in your hand, these paper in the books, they hold together because of that binding. Mm. Yes or no? That binding. If you take it out of that binding, these are just a piece of paper. So the binding keep this one together. And I believe the research question you're going to have, this is the binding. So you're going to keep everything together. So you know where you start, where you're going to finish, because that is the binding, is keep it together. Annie, do you want to add anything? Do you have anything to say, my friend, from your experience? Is he here? I think he just popped out. Right. The other things I wanted to say about the literature review. Okay. I have realized the major mistake. This is what I've done as well myself, and I'm telling you not to do it. In the modern writing of the literature review, you cannot, when I'm saying you cannot, you certainly cannot, to say, I only follow the one literature review system. In the modern literature review, because of the complexity of the literature we have, because the different variety of disciplines we have, you cannot just say this one, I only done the systematic literature review and that's it. This is a fatal and definitely is going to fail you in all aspects of the writing literature review. You should be able to use combination, a multi-analysis of the literature. That's why the criticality is coming into the place. The multi-level means you're going to say, you might have a systematic, combine it with the narrative, combine it with an interpretation. Because these days, because there are bombardment with so much of information, you cannot just say, I've done my systematic. And if you do that in the journal article, in the 2, 3, and 4-star journals, they will certainly reject you, or they're going to give you some review to do again. And the most important thing, and I know some of you are very good at it and some of them are not, you may learn this one in a very difficult way. You need one of those software mentioned for your record after doing the literature review. Specifically, we prefer Mendeley because we think Mendeley is very user-friendly. It's very good. It gives you lots of options, but some other people may use EndNote or different type of the software.
I believe Zotero is very good as well.
Yeah, that's also, there is a new one as well. There is a new one which is coming, e-research something they call it, which is, I think is French, but it seems to be is very good. But this is free of charge software. That is free of charge. You can have it on your laptop, you can have it on your tab, you can have it on your mobile phone. It does do the job for you. And with the click a button at the end, you can get all the bibliography, which you must. I spent 2 weeks to get them to my PhD. 2 weeks. You could get them with the click a button in the matter of 2 seconds. And imagine if you want to change a style from Harvard to APA or any other thing, again, with the click a button, you can do it. Whereas if you want to do manually, it takes another 2 weeks to correct that one.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying about using a mixture of methods. I mean, if you look at this example, the top row here, steps 1 to 3, 1, 2, and 3, those would be done with a systematic review. You have one construct, or with 3 sub-constructs. It's comparatively easy to find the literature that's relevant to it. But then it was also interesting to do this as a historical development from the 1960s through to the 2000s. And then this is where you have to depart from devices like the systematic review. We thought that putting this into context, into an organizational theory context, would actually produce new insights. And that, of course, is just that's our expertise, isn't it? That's our subjectivity that we've brought into it. And then when you're looking at different organization theories that might help, then you have to be a bit more intuitive about it. So these, you've got first of all, a systematic approach, and then a historical approach, and then a theoretical approach. And it all adds up to an interpretive approach altogether. So this is the way that you have to think, really, in order to produce work that's significant.
think the other major things, guys, you need to understand is there is a big difference between the writing literature review for journal and the PhD or any thesis, right? And the difference is, in a very blunt way and a very easy way, in the PhD or thesis writing, you are educating your reader. And when you're trying to educate, you're assuming that person doesn't know anything, and you need to go to the extensive level of the explanation sometimes with the, I don't know, sometimes definitions on. In our article writing, you are talking to expert in your field. Maybe some of the reviewer are actually a person who actually come up with the theory of the whatever you're writing about. So you don't need to tell them what they said. They know that. You need to say in the article why you are using this one and in which way you are using this one. They don't want to know your definition. They don't want it. They know that. They don't want a brief explanation of the knowing that. They want to know what is this study about, and more importantly, they want to know what you used and why you used it for. That whereas in the thesis writing, you may actually start talking about the definition. You may start talking about this one because that is in the longer piece. I mean, in your PhD, you may write roughly about 80 to 100,000. In the whole article, you need to bring all of those 100,000 into the only 10,000 words. So we don't have a space. We don't have a time to talk about the general point and talk about something. And more importantly, if something does not have any connection with your study, do not need to be there at all. Because you like the person, you like the name of the person, that doesn't give you the basic right to add that thing. So if you're saying, let me just give you an example, and I give you that example all the time. If I'm in the article, I'm going to talk about, and criticality of the literature is coming to that. If I'm going to say Mr. X saying that and Mr. Y saying that, without saying why these Mr. X and Mr. Y are written in my literature review, then that become descriptive, and that is what is normally the people going to get the review or rejection. But if I'm going to say Mr. X who follow school of thought of A, whereas on the other hand, Mr. Y who are following the school of thought of B, then that is a criticality. And I'm just going to establish myself. So in this study, we follow Mr. X because this is more relevant, because. Then this is a criticality, because not only I'm talking about the two different school of thought and who are representative of them, I also, and I acknowledge there are two different school of thought may not be exactly the same, but I also saying why I am following the one of them and what is the reason this is study following that. This is the criticality of the literature review. Majority of the article we see in when the people writing it when are junior is just a descriptive, saying Mr. X saying that, Mr. What the heck this got to do anything with your research? If they don't have any connection, then they don't need to be there. That's a simple rule.
Yeah.
Peter?
I think I was just thinking back to the first couple of articles that we collaborated on, which we published in ungraded journals. And I think that we did have a tendency just to include things in a sort of ragbag sort of way. You know, here's some info. We're talking about, for example, organizational culture. Well, so-and-so says something about organizational culture, and there's somebody else who says something different about, and so on. And it didn't really add up to a coherent argument.
Not at all. Not at all.
It's easy to slip into that trap. Actually, as you get better and you start going to 3 and even 4-star journals, then you have to make every word count. Every sentence has to have a lot of meaning attached to it, because you haven't got much space. And you have to put a lot in there to justify your research questions.
And the final point before we're going to open the stage for the people to ask a question is, in some respects, students are taking not to the chance of the theory. And I think that is a major mistake. We always, specifically for those of you going to do the quantitative a lot, you realize this one, the major mistake you're going to face is that where is this backbone theory we're talking about? Where is the theory coming into the place? And why these theories come into the place and not other theory? The theory is a backbone. It means you keep is a part of the bindings, but it keeps your argument flowing better because you need to base on the something. For instance, if you're using the social exchange theory, for example, in one of the paper, Peter and I, we went through the extension of the discussion because we would love to use the social exchange theory, but we couldn't quite relate it because that is maybe what we were talking about, the group things and there were individual things. And then we find there is a section of that from another very famous guy, which is related to our things. So it's not just the mention of that theory, but you need to say it how these theory related. Sometimes it doesn't quite normally fit with your argument. You need to look for the branches and looking for where it can be related to and how it can be related. Remember that, Peter, we were talking about how we can use that.
Yeah. I think sometimes you get into some very interesting discussions with your reviewers when you submit articles. And I think that was one of them. I think that the reviewer that we were particularly mindful of hadn't really grasped the fact that we were taking SET in a slightly different direction to what he was expecting. And therefore, we had to make it very clear that we were, and we hadn't realized that. Another one was a very interesting comment we had from a reviewer some time ago. I can't remember which article it was on, where he said, this reviewer, I don't know if it was male or female, but anyway, they said that our hypotheses shouldn't only come from the literature. And we were a bit stunned by that, you know. I mean, where else would you expect your hypotheses to come from? But of course, they have to be related back to the problem as well, to the research problem. And that really made us think. And I think, you know,
That was a leader in our organization, IJCHM.
Ah, right, okay. I think you have to realize that, you know, discussion is very useful because things that are obvious to you aren't necessarily obvious to other people. And you might think you've explained something clearly when it actually isn't clear to everyone. And I do think that the review process actually teaches you a lot.
I think the same thing is for teaching. Sometimes I remember that for some of the concepts I couldn't quite get the grasp of them when I was a student. When I start teaching them, I said, "Oh, that is clear." I don't know what is make the change when you become a teacher. Those of the things you couldn't learn before now become quite crystal clear. The same for when you become a reviewer. You are actually become very harsh on the people on some of the mistakes you are actually doing quite usually. You yourself become critical of the other people why you have done that, and you're doing it all the time yourself. And that's the beauty of being this one. Anyway, I think we should leave. The floor is for you guys. For you, if you have any question, you can raise your hand, and then you can open your mic and ask it. We have another half an hour, 40 minutes to answer any question you may have. And if it's any part is not quite clear, let us know. We can go through. There are lots we can discuss about in literature, but because of the timing, we can't go through. But we are happy to answer any question.
Rosalind.
Yes, Peter, thank you very much for this insightful presentation. I have a question actually about the publication of literature reviews, because recently I've been talking to some friends who have actually conducted systematic literature reviews, and then they're having a hard time getting acceptance from editors. So is there like a specific maybe recommendation that you would like to give us? Because finally, the ultimate goal is to publish and not just conduct a research. So I would really appreciate it if you could share your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that the literature review articles are quite difficult to do because what you're doing is you've got a kind of fairly narrow audience, I think. I mean, if you are working on something and you come across a very good literature review, either as part of another article or a literature review article, that can really, really change things. But I think, first of all, they're difficult to do. And secondly, I think that it's, you have to really have your audience very clearly in mind. And that's probably where your friends are going wrong. I mean, I would have to see the actual article before I could comment in any more detail, but I think that that's usually where it goes wrong. Not having your audience in mind, and therefore perhaps having the wrong slant so that it isn't really useful to very many people, something like that.
Yes, thank you very much. And
The other
could I add one more thing to my question?
Sure.
Because more often than not, I see these wonderful literature reviews saying that I don't know, for example, these concepts have been less explored, and then they suggest the less explored areas as future research streams.
Yeah.
How reliable do you think such recommendations could be? Because sometimes really not exploring it by previous scholars does not really mean that it is of value. So what about this one?
Well, of course, I have to admit that there are certain expectations when you're writing an article, and one of them is that the article should actually show the way forward to future research. And I think it's actually quite difficult sometimes for the authors to work out what those directions might be. After all, you don't know what perspectives other people might have. So yeah, I wouldn't say that they were hugely reliable, to be honest. I would say that sometimes they can be, but usually if it is a good source of inspiration for future research, then probably that researcher themselves will have gone off and done it. So I suppose the honest answer to that is not very. Ali Reza, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think, Rezvan, there is another thing you should always remember. Academia, the same as many other things, there has a trend as well, and the fashion. If you are looking at the 10 years ago, there was a fashion to publish systematic literature a lot. And even the very good journal used to do that. Now, the fashion and the trend changed to the bibliometric, possibly. And because it's more sophisticated and cover more important things, people, they don't quite in favor of the systematic literature. That's another thing you need to consider. This is exactly the same thing from any other industry. There are sometimes the trends, sometimes fashion involved in the industry. Right now, for one reason or another, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm not going to say that, is bibliometrics are becoming quite popular and trends. And if you have a bibliometric literature review, it can go fly in many of the good art journals. Who knows in the 5 years time it's going to happen. But I remember when I was a student, you could see a lot of the journal, 3 or 4 star journal. It was a good trend of the pop, and that was my supervisor. You need to get the systematic literature review to submit it to one of these journals. It was a trend in 2010, 11 to about 13, but it has changed. So I think your friend possibly is old-fashioned a little bit as well. So you need to consider that one. Although I believe still there are some journals that still accept and publish the good systematic literature as long as it's become critical. Because when you're talking about a systematic literature review, it means also need to come up with something we don't know, isn't it? Is no paper going to publish, even the literature review, if you're not able to convince the reader what is the outcome and contribution of that one.
And I think, yeah, you mentioned a very good point, because I think that criticality component is really the missing ingredient, even in many of the published literature reviews that I've read, actually. So it's just like a descriptive of the previous research, but really no critical item added. So maybe that's another reason. Thank you.
Yeah, I think possibly it's too systematic, not enough interpretive. Could be the point here. Yeah.
Thank you very
Severin.
much.
That's right, Severin.
Oh yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for your workshop or the lecture. It was very enlightening, just like last time. Alvisa, I think you're ahead of your time, because I think a lot of journals still are stuck on the systematic review path. That's why I think Peter's contribution is so important. And I posted on the chat an update actually by Alderson and Sandberg. You cited their 2011 piece. They have one 2022, and is a response to others. So I believe there's a critical discussion right now between these two types of literature review: the bureaucratic exercise of systematic reviews and the more interpretive hermeneutic that Peter is talking about. So I think this is quite helpful. But this is also, does it become like a tale of two types of reviews?
No, I don't think so. You see, I think that that's a mistaken way of looking at it. I think that, you know, you can't say that in Kuhnian terms that normal science is bad and you should always be disrupting the paradigms. You can't always be disrupting the paradigm. Obviously not. You're only going to be able to do that to a small extent. Although actually I believe that now is the time to disrupt paradigms, because if you look at the major theories in organization studies, for example, which is where I spend my waking hours, those theories were mostly developed in the 1980s, possibly into the 90s, but really nothing major new in the last 20 years. And this is because, I think, of institutional requirements to publish. You know, it's not so, it's much easier if you're trying to produce as many papers as you can each year to do normal science. And also because of the constraints of the format of journal articles, which are not very long, it's very difficult to have a sustained argument for something on a bigger scale. You know, if you're going to produce a major new theory, you're going to have to write a book. That probably means you're going to have to spend several years that are apparently unproductive in terms of journal articles. And then it may take several years for that book to actually make any impact. So that there's a lot of institutional pressures to keep everything small scale and normal science.
Well, can I follow up on that really quick? Because I still believe that we see a little bit of a revival of the critical essay. So I believe now what you see, say, hermeneutic or interpretive review is kind of a vamped up version of the critical essay. And many journals have their own section for this kind of research, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, and I thought I didn't want to evaluate the systematic reviews. I will use them myself. I just find them pretty boring. I wouldn't want to do one.
Yes, so, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And I do think that actually among my contemporaries on the PhD, there were a lot of people who decided while they were doing a PhD that they didn't want to go into academia because they felt that it was a kind of bureaucratic process. And I think that that was a huge loss, because it was some of the most talented people decided not to come into academia, but to become consultants instead. Also, by the way, Ali Reza was talking about fashion now. Just like to add something about that. You know, with fashion, people are fashion seekers, aren't they? I mean, you know, one moment something is the thing, the next moment then it's anything but that thing. So it's binary, it's either on or it's off. And I think that that is a big mistake. Because, I mean, for example, Talcott Parsons in sociology. Talcott Parsons was, you know, the flavor of the times for a time. Then people noticed the weaknesses in his theories and abandoned him completely. And now he's still, you know, from a sort of byword for over-theoretical approaches. Actually, I went back and read some Talcott Parsons, and I thought that there were valuable things in there, even though there were weaknesses in his ideas, and they should have been developed more rather than completely abandoned. But this is what happens in academia. So you could go back to something that's been abandoned and find some value in it, I think. And that's a good way, actually, I think, of developing new ideas.
I think, Severin, what I was trying to say is that I did, as I mentioned, I didn't say this one is not going to be good to do the systematic literature review. I said this one is more difficult as compared to about 10 years ago to publish it. In 10 years ago, it was quite easy, relatively, to publish systematic literature review. Remember that, the same things. For instance, 10 years ago, you could publish article with the SPSS analysis. And the SCM was something extra, which was very considered as a very sophisticated. These days, you cannot, in the good journal article, like, I don't know, 2, 3, even 1 star, I would say, you cannot just publish with the SPSS analysis. You see, these are the fashion, the trend. I'm not saying CD cannot, but it's becoming more difficult. Every steps we're going to further, they become more difficult. That is why I mentioned about the bibliometric literature review. Is kind of things is everybody talking about. Let's have it bibliometric. My point is, you cannot survive in academia if you do not have systematic, narrative, interpretive, and bibliometric anymore in the next couple of years. You need to have the combination of all these. I think it's become kind of the very important things. And also, I totally agree with Peter. I don't quite like the fashion, but sometimes if you want to follow the fashion, then if you want to be in the game, because there is a game. In academia, we have a game, right? Game of the publishing, game of the funding. It is a game. Before, you become a scholar at university if you have a published book. Yes, if you have a book which is groundbreaking and you become a professor because of that book. These days at university, nobody cares about the book as such. Nobody cares. It's just asking you where is the article been published and where is this in the 3 or 4 star journal article published or not. Because it brings money to university. It's a financial element of it as well. You may have 10 books. Because it doesn't bring anything to university, it has no value for universities. But if you have a 3 or 4 star article, 3 star bring 20,000, 4 star could bring up to about 30, 35,000 to university. It has a value, have a financial value for university. And that becomes the kind of the game. Right, Setare.
Well, thank you for the good points. It might be a general question, but I wanted to ask, how can I combine bibliometric and systematic review?
That's a good question, yes. Well, it depends what you're trying to achieve, I suppose. I mean, if what you have to do is to decide what it is that you want to make, what point you want to make in the end, because even a review article really makes a point, doesn't it? It makes a point perhaps about how the theory is developed, or what it can be used for, or what methodology it's appropriate for it, and so on. So it's all a matter of actually getting consistency between them, I think, between the system that you use for your systematic review and the point that you're trying to make with your overall bibliometric analysis. Alireza, you wanted
the
to
only
say.
thing I want, and then I want to ask Pantai. Pantai is here, as she can actually is a very expert on that. I think, remember, you need to remember there is a, I would have said bibliometric is very much quantitative, whereas the systematic is very qualitative, if you think about it, if you want to be very bluntly identify them. Even if you are doing the bibliometrics, in some respect, you need to start reading those articles to know that. But when you do the system of the bibliometric, going through system, you are filtering them and get to some points. You need to review them anyway. You can't just say this one, okay, it's not going to be, okay, so what? I've got to, is it quantitative, the numbers involved in that? But you cannot assume that one, there's nothing need to be done on that one, because you need to understand what this article talking about. Panta, are you here with us?
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Alireza. Actually, I can easily answer this question based on, adding some information to Peter and Alireza. When we are talking about the bibliometric is not only quantitative approach, it has to be qualitative. One of the big issue that everyone they think it's only we bring all the articles, we bring it as a quantitative. No, it doesn't get published. That's one of the key points. We can publish it, just adding those, for example, how many country that published this, you know, how many people they talk about, all this kind of stuff, for example, to bring the clusters or bring the groups, but it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't add any value to literature. When we are talking about a proper bibliometric, it means we review all the clusters, we review all the collected papers from Web of Science or any kind of, you know, any other sources. We review each of them. We critically review, not only review. And usually what I do, if you look at the papers I published, I created tables. Each paper reviewed clearly. We found a gap in the paper, and then when we are we are working on the cluster, we talk about all those gaps based on those articles. Is not only reviewing, we have to find the issue from each of the papers. Also, you know, bibliometric is systematic literature review. It doesn't mean I only review 28 papers. No, if there are 506 papers, you have to review all of them individually. And the easiest way, which I could suggest everyone, to create a table in Excel or Word, whatever you want. Just look at the papers. You can find out which kind of paper I'm explaining. We are talking about two kinds of table. One in highly cited. For example, when we are talking about the sensory, we look at all the papers discuss about sensory, okay? However, there is one which you could create, the future model. Future model is the most important one because you proposing the future, you know, you are recommending the future researchers to follow your model, and based on your model, they have to create minimum 100 different models, okay? You look at the antecedent, you look at the consequences, moderator, everything. It's based on the simple model you feel, you look at one model, but based on the one model, the other researchers should, I'm just emphasizing, should create more than 100 models. Then you could say, yes, that is something novel, which has not been explored by the previous studies. Regarding the highly cited, which usually I create the model based on the highly cited and latest articles, okay? The latest article, you create another table, and then you explain everything. Then you look at the implications, you look at the contribution implication, plus future section, future study section. Then in your discussion, you should explain everything clearly. Maybe you come up with a new theory, okay? Maybe you come up with a new concept which has not been explored. That we could call it as a proper bibliometric systematic literature review. You have to come up with something novel, proposed to the future scholars. And I think it's very, very simple to do it, but it's very time consuming. For example, my latest paper, which is published recently in IJMR, it is around 1.5 years. And in the first round, reviewer, they come back and they say, why you have not done this? Okay, we've done it. And in the second round, they come back and I said, okay, because it's gone through another reviewer, because the reviewer, it wasn't available, unfortunately, and we had to collect the data again. We do the analysis again. It means when you do the analysis, all the paper from A to Z will change. But they love it. You know, the new reviewer say, I have no comment, and accepted it straight away. It's very big compared to the SEM papers or, you know, different kind of quant or qual study. It's very time consuming. But you're gonna be the expert in the field. There is no doubt, no one can argue you. Hope I answer you, Setare.
Thank you very much. It was clear, but I have another question, if I may ask. What if I want to use it in an article, literature review, and combine these two to tell my readers why I'm using these articles in here, and why this can help me to answer the question that I'm seeking for.
Okay. You mean you only use the bibliometric and systematic in your literature section?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. You don't do that. When you want to do, are you talking about the PhD thesis? Or are you talking about the article?
Article.
Okay, if you want to use it in an article, you could say, for example, you put it as a different study. A study 1, bibliometric. A study 2, for example, you create a model and you examine the model. You cannot use the bibliometric only in the literature review. It doesn't it doesn't make sense. Or I would usually, what I'm doing, I'm following the bibliometric because it gives me all the directions, and also it would be the critical literature review, something which is always is very descriptive, but it helps you to be more critical, write critical literature review. What you do, you follow the stages completely, and then based on the result, you write your literature review, but you don't need to mention about the numbers or anything. Do you know what I'm talking about? You completely remove all the numbers, look at the result based on your reviewed article. But you don't mention that you've done based on the bibliometric. Just mention something else. You know, the top journals, JAMS or others, you know, JCR, JSR, all, or even JM, Journal of Marketing. Most of them, they publish systematic literature review. Those are familiar with this topic, with these journals. Only they write systematic, okay? But how they do it? They do through I know some of them very well. They do based on the bibliometric analysis, which I'm going to do, you know, very soon. I do the bibliometric, okay? And then I remove all the numbers. I only review those articles, and then I write, because based on those results, it's kind of trick, you know, because writing the systematic, proper systematic or narrative is quite difficult. But bibliometric give you the, you know, tools, is a tools to write systematic literature review, because you only focus on specific papers. When it give you cluster, okay, means in your section, you write these 2 papers or 3 papers critically. It would be your proper 1 paragraph.
Right, I got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
There are the 2 things, guys. I am planning to, I will talk to Peter and see this one, if we can run a workshop on the literature review in July, meaning you need to have your literature review as a workshop. What I'm saying is going to be hands-on workshop, means you have your literature review, you bring it to the workshop, and Peter and I, we can go through it and, you know, working together and trying to develop that one. Peter, we can do that, can we not?
Yes, I think that's a very good idea, in fact.
We will do. And Pantel, can we have run something like a bibliometric for the students, something kind of workshop, and see this one, if we can run the workshop to how to do the bibliometric as well, sometime later in maybe.
I would be happy to do it anyways, but a student should, you know, it would be 2 sessions. Because I give them a direction, they do it, and
that's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, we might. My plan was maybe we give them a first workshop on Monday, for instance, and we're going to tell them the second one is going to be on Friday. So they work on the couple of days on it, and they come back on Friday to see what they have got, something like that.
great. But it would be much better to go through after your and Peter's
Yes,
workshop.
yes. So I think it's going to be possibly in August. So I will let you guys know when we're going to run this workshop. So if you have a literature review for your article, for your thesis, for your PhD, sometimes in July, we're going to have a 1 day from the morning, hands-on. We are not going to say anything. You're going to show us, you're going to explain to that, and we're going to give you direction how to improve that. And hopefully in August, we're going to have another workshop, 2 days, for the bibliometric with Panta and us. Okay.
Excuse me, and could you maybe introduce some recommended readings for conducting a systematic literature review and also a bibliometric?
Peter, can you show that references list if you have? I think it's not very full. I think we perhaps need to produce something that's a bit more detailed. All right. So what we're going to do, when we're going to set up the meetings, and we will give you the list of the reading as well to do, maybe a month earlier than that. I will send an email to everyone. So this is the list you should read about the systematic literature review. And if a Ponter got anything, she's gonna let us know, and I'm gonna send another email with those reading lists you need to do for the bibliometric later on.
Thank you very much. I will send a list.
That's right. Okay. Any other question? Or we still got 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes. If anybody got any question, either on the systematic or the bibliometric or any, Hania.
Hello, everyone.
Hania, the rule is you need to have your camera on. Otherwise, we are not going to answer your question.
Oh, okay. So let me come back.
How do you know? Is Hania? It might be Abdullah. How do I supposed to know? It's misleading. It's misleading. The validity and reliability of everything are important on them. Severin, go on.
Oh, thank you. No, I just want to say I posted one article that's pretty recently from the Annual Review of Psychology on systematic reviews, which I stumbled
Yes,
across.
that was one of them I wanted to ask them. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was I was looking for the whole things. So you bit me on that.
Thank you.
So this is one of those articles I suggest to my students to read for narrative and the systematic literature review as such. It's good. There is a what was the Peter, the name of that guy who wrote about organizational culture as well? And no, I'll find the way. 2012, you know, the guy on organizational culture. Not Anderson. Why got Anderson? Alverson. Yeah. Alverson. He's got the, I think, 2013 an article on the systematic literature. Okay, there you go. That's Hania. Okay, so we can confirm that. You can ask a question now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. It was perfect, and I've learned a lot. I want to know your idea about some tools such as VUS Viewer, to use it for literature review. And I should say I'm a beginner in doing research, so I want to know your idea about it.
About what, sorry? I think she's asking about the literature. Hania, one of the software I quite like, it's designed for the qualitative data analysis, but I personally use it for the literature review is NVivo. NVivo is, to me, is not only for the qualitative researchers, it actually works perfectly well for the literature review. Why? Because it lets you to, it works like a library, right? And when you put all your article, everything you want to do, even the book or even, I don't know, website on that, then it helps you to systematically search in them and provide a theme, node, and code to do the literature review. I quite like NVivo for the literature review, and I suggest to my
early career students and those PhD students to certainly use, not think about the NVivo as a qualitative software for the literature review software. Panta, Peter, if you have anything to add on that.
I would have
Thank
thought, yeah, I would have thought that NVivo would be quite good for, I mean, I've never tried it for this, but I would have thought it would be quite good for a bibliometric analysis of qualitative data. I mean, qualitative articles. No, I very much find that Mendeley is very, very handy for almost all of my purposes. It's got an enormous amount of storage capacity to say it's free. And of course, it interfaces with Word. I'm not sure that NVivo does it, Ali Reza?
But NVivo helps you to provide a code and note. You know, when you're writing an article on a literature review, for instance, you're talking about effectiveness, yeah, and you're looking for the who said that. Mendeley doesn't help you with that much, but the NVivo can create that kind of notes and codes for you to be able, for instance, search for, I don't know, effectiveness is give you all the nodes and the codes be mentioned in different articles, so you have your library on that one, which is quite Mendeley also would.
I haven't tried to use it for that, but it does sound like a good idea. I mean, one of the things that happens with Mendeley after a time is that you have these subfolders that you put different projects into, but then as you finish the project, the folder becomes pointless. And then you have a whole, just one big list of articles. And then that becomes ungainly. And it's difficult, they're not that easy to search on as if you had been able to tag it.
Yeah.
So I do think that what Ali Reza says makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I have been working with some of my PhD students with NVivo only for the purpose of literature review, not for the data analysis because they are quantitative. And it worked perfectly well. I'm not saying this is going to work for everyone, but so far for those people I forced them or in a way encouraged them to use, it worked fine. Panta, do you have any idea?
Thank you very much, Ayuso. I really, I usually work with NVivo, but there are many other software which is, use as the data storage. We know that the NVivo is not the data analysis software, it's only data storage, which will give you the notes or clustering, or it's a very good, as for example, as Alireza mentioned, you search the gaps from all the papers inserted to the NVivo, they are all comes up, and they give you the connection, like kind of the grouping and the clustering. I as exactly same as Alireza, I use it for literature review because for my qualitative study I don't really believe on NVivo. I usually, for the data triangulation, I use manually plus using NVivo. That's why I don't only recommend using NVivo because it doesn't give you much. It gives you some kind of directions, but for reliability of your data analysis, I would recommend to use manually plus NVivo. But there are some other software which you can use, but it's chargeable. One is called Leximancer. It kind of the clustering, but it gives you very good clustering.
But it's expensive, Panta. It's expensive.
Sorry?
I think it's expensive for a student.
It is quite expensive. Yes, it's quite expensive. But it's very, very useful. And it's quite fashionable these days. But personally, I love NVivo. And I'm using it for around I think 15 years. Yeah, I'm using it for 15 years.
I think because it's fairly cheap. I mean, when I'm saying cheap, is if you're using through university, it must come free to you. That would do what you want to do for that level of the review. But it's good for the putting things. Is it like a library? As I said, it's going to put it in the shelf for you. And it's quite easy to find out what you really want. And you don't need to spend the time to go through an article to find some of the thing you read maybe a month or 2 months ago. And I think the major things from NVivo is a clustering as well, in a way, after not quite sophisticated based on the other software which are chargeable. It do it in a way that one is user friendly and it can be used for the different level of the people, from junior to advanced level. Anybody else got any question before we leave you alone for your lunch? I mean, for those of you in Iran, I think it's more than lunch. You pass your lunch time. It's maybe siesta.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah, go on.
What software do you suggest for bibliometric analysis?
Panta is yours. Panta.
Thank you, Alireza. Depending on what exactly you want to do. What is your aim? Alireza.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, now we can hear you, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Depends on what exactly you're looking for in bibliometric. There are many software you can use. For example, first of all, you can use the SPSS. There are many softwares. I cannot bring just only one or two names. Depending on what you're looking for. That's it. But look at my paper. For example, I use BibExcel to do the analysis for the papers. And after the BibExcel, for example, you use Leximancer. You can use many other softwares. If you want to have a, for example, visual picture, there are specific software you can use. And they are not very, it's completely up to you. What is your aim? But I would suggest to use more than 2 or 3 different softwares, which helps you for triangulation and it gives you different directions. Because if you only use one, you won't get much results. But combining these 3, for example, MDS, you do HCA, it gives you different directions, and then based on those, you create your own story. Hope you got the answer right here. You're welcome.
Yes, I got it. Thank you.
That's all right, Seven.
Well, it's more a bit of a comment. Peter said before that writing a critical or interpretive review is kind of hard, and I just want to second to that. I've written a number of quantitative papers, and they're more or less you go through the same schema, right? You go like a recipe. And I also found the narrative interpretive review pretty hard. Sooner or later, I believe it will land on your desk, Peter, so be gentle. But yeah, I've been improving this, but it is really hard. I think it requires us to be more of a social scientists rather than, natural scientists or number crunchers.
To be quite honest with you, I don't believe there is anything is easy. Even eating the spicy food is really difficult, I guess. So there's nothing in the world is easy. I think it depends on which perspective you're looking at. Quantitative, qualitative, they are as hard as each other. I mean, you can't say this one is harder than the other one. You may get used to one and you get quite good at one, then you feel easier to do it. That doesn't mean the other one is more difficult or this is easier than the other one. It depends how you feel your comfort zone. And when you find your comfort zone, then you think the other part is not quite easy. And that's, I think, is a matter of opinion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a question of choosing your challenges, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I really enjoyed the challenge of the theoretical, of actually getting the theory right and productive. Other people prefer, hard facts and figures.
You see, that's exactly the point. I mean, for instance, why Peter and I, we've been working, it's been almost 10 years, Peter and I, we are working together. We are totally in the opposite spectrum, right? Peter is the mastermind behind it and trying to think about it critically and the qualitatively. I am the number crunching person and understand numbers, right? when I'm saying understand the numbers in terms of the thing, I feel connection with it because my background is engineering. And I feel connected with the numbers rather than words. And that makes, and the same way I think Pantea thinking, she's extremely good at the methodology and the analysis. And that's why three of us have been working for a very long time. And because each one of us will have advantage. Again, that is why I don't believe single authorship. I don't believe in the single authorship.
Yeah.
I think team working is always the case and is always the winning point. Because whether you like it or not, you always have some shortcoming. That shortcoming can be covered by somebody else's strengths.
Thank you. I completely get your point, and also didn't want to make it sound like, let's say for me it's harder, right? Because the one you have more like a rule. You have more. It's more like rule based. You can say I treat this according to this rule in or out. But the other one, you have to theorize more, you have to think more. So let's reframe it like this. Coming from also from a quantitative background, like you do, and interestingly, I'm also an engineer by training. This is pretty hard. So I found a new challenge in that interpretive critical review. But I completely get your point.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I found it extremely difficult. It took me about good couple of years to understand how I'm supposed to making sense of the linking thing together. I mean, Peter can confirm that one because he used to proofread me, and he was just giving me a call and said, "What the heck are you talking about on this paragraph?" I said, "I don't know. You're supposed to make a sense of it." and then we went through length of discussion, sometimes arguments, sometimes close to fight.
Yeah, he used to write the words and then I'd put the meaning in.
Yeah.
So you're telling us I think a good piece of advice is have co-authors and pick them wisely, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, I have got nothing to shame of that, but if it wasn't Peter or Pantea with me, we wouldn't be able to do some of this paper we have done together. I mean, Pantea can say this one. How many times I actually had an argument with her, and my wife shouldn't get involved because my wife said, "I'm so angry," and she was calling Pantea, said, "Pantea, leave him alone. Don't worry about it." And it was just a paper, but Pantea and I, sometimes we were shouting not in the bad way. It was just, we are trying to send the message over to each other and we get angry of each other. Then the next day we were having coffee.
I think that is a favor of, that is a nice of working together, Alireza, because we do have completely different perception. You're coming from a different paradigm. Sometimes I don't understand when you're talking about the culture, remember? And I was saying, no, culture, it means this, because from my paradigm, it's completely, it's different meaning. But understanding each other, that's why we could work together very well and we create different publication, which we publish it easily in different journals, which I think that is that's quite interesting.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter and Pantea, both of you.
Adding some knowledge to, to the paper, plus, kind of improving, adding some kind of, what is this called? We enjoy more.
Yeah, I think if I want to be very blunt on that one, correct me, Peter or Pantea, if I'm mistaken. If you're alone, you're in your own bubble. When you're working with the other people, the 4 bubbles come together and become bigger bubble.
Yeah.
And if you're only standing in your own bubble, then you have a very limited thing to contribute. Whereas if the different bubble get together, the bigger bubble have more important thing to say and possibly more groundbreaking thing to say. Well, but that is not coming easy. It's come to the price. And the price means you argue with each other sometimes. Sometimes you a little bit angry with each other, but in a friendly way.
And I do think it's difficult to find people who you can work with, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, I don't like Peter anyway.
Mutual.
Exactly. No, I think Peter and I, exactly, because we also been friends for a very long time. friendship is very good. Honestly, friendship is really important when you write. I know Panta for about 15 years, 15, 16 years. I know Peter for 11 years. You build up on that. You can't just have a co-authorship with someone and think everything going to be green. It's not going to be green.
Yeah.
And it takes time to build the trust between the parties.
It does, yeah.
Anyway, is there any other question before we can go for our beautiful lunches? Anybody got any question? If not, I can close the today morning session, and then I'll see you at 2 o'clock, all of you. We have another presentation with one of Dr. Irwani is coming to talk about insightful things about the financial elements and marketing. We are planning to do possibly a workshop on the cryptocurrency as well, if those of you are interested in that. Dr. Irvani is very professional and expert in the cryptocurrencies. We might do that one. But I will promise you, we will do the 2 workshop, one in the literature review. Peter and I, we're going to do that sometimes in July, and I will tell you that. And we do another thing with Panta on the bibliometric, possibly in August, during August. Looking forward to seeing you all in the afternoon. Enjoy your lunch, and if you have a siesta, you're going to enjoy your siesta, and I'll see you about 2 o'clock UK time. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so very much.
Thank
It was
you.
really good talk. Thank you.
Bye.
Aloisa, I'll catch up to you tomorrow at the latest.
Pardon?
I catch up with you tomorrow because I have to teach
Sure.
now.
Well, I know. I'll talk to you tomorrow, my friend. All right, you take care.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hello, Omid and Kiana. We have just finished the morning session, and we're going to go for lunch and come back at 2 o'clock UK time.